Probably one of the most riveting choices in all of Prey is deciding the fate of Aaron Ingram. He's a captive aboard Talos 1 who is a convicted criminal in a Russian gulag on death row, who was taken from his captivity to instead be held aboard the space station as one of many volunteers who are used in heinous experiments. When we find Aaron, we can read his rap sheet to see that he's been convicted of human trafficking, kidnapping, solicitation of a minor, amongst other many offenses. And it's here we get to decide whether to let Aaron go from his containment cell, or if we should instead release a mimic into the cage and allow it to tear Aaron's body apart and turn him into an alien host. The decision can have drastic consequences on the ending of the game and is an analogy to the Myers-Briggs tests at the beginning, but regardless of what you pick, this event with Aaron gives us a good insight into the research that was happening aboard Talos 1. You see, TranStar would take convicted felons and volunteers of people in jail on Earth and place them into holding facilities on board the station, after which they would be fed to Typhon organisms in order to allow them to multiply and create more versions of themselves, which could then be harvested in a recycler in order to help with the creation of neuromods. And this means that all of those neuromods we are using in game that were created before, over 8,000 as we hear in some dialogue lines from Alex Yu, are created off the backs of tortured and sacrificed humans. A haunting revelation, for sure. One of the most horrifying stories in the entirety of Prey has to be that of Luka Golukin. You see, Luka was originally one of the hundreds of Russian convicts in the Talos 1 volunteer program, where heinous criminals and sometimes innocents with forged convictions volunteered themselves to become guinea pigs for top secret research conducted via the megacorporation TranStar. But in Luka's case, he was an especially violent and evil individual. On Earth, he would jerry-rig entire explosive devices and commit terrorist acts, and when first moved aboard Talos 1, it was said that he immediately bit the finger of one of the researchers off and swallowed it whole. In fact, in one early experiment, a telepath Typhon implant was put into his brain and showed massive aversion to his mind, considering it pure evil, meaning one of the most wicked alien forces in the entire galaxy couldn't even stand him. But as if it couldn't get any worse during his time on Talos 1, Luka was given extensive neuromod testing and experimentation that over time, just like Morgan, began to cause significant personality drift. At one point, a neuromod of the award-winning chef on board Talos 1 named William Mitchell was given to Luka, and after the operation, Luka awoke not only with impressive culinary skills, but also a deep, deep hatred for the real chef. It's because of this that during the Typhon outbreak on the space station that Luka's first order of business was heading to the cafeteria and slaughtering William Mitchell in cold blood, after which he took his name tag and uniform and assumed the role of the now murdered man. And that leads us to meeting with him in game, where we can find him in the cafeteria where he claims he is in fact William Mitchell, and that he needs us to find a water valve regulator in order to fix his kitchen. If we do help him out though, he tells us to go grab something in the freezer, after which he swiftly locks the door and tries to kill us. And after we awake barely alive, he calls and taunts us throughout the rest of the game, leading to one of the most memorable side quests in the entire story. Where this tale starts to get absolutely crazy though, is how many insane stories and theories revolve around this man Luka. First of all, in that freezer that we get locked in, many players searched around and noticed lots of weird looking and unidentified meat all over the counters that certainly didn't look like eels, which is the main source of food on Talos 1. Another interesting thing we'll dive into later. And this weird discovery only becomes more horrifying if we actually go to a computer terminal on the station and try to locate William Mitchell's real tracking bracelet. Because if we do, it leads us right into one of these pieces of suspicious and mysterious meat in the freezer, strongly implying that Luka has been killing people aboard Talos 1 and storing their remains in the freezer to eat at a later date. A cannibal amongst our midst. But Luka being a cannibal might be the least of our worries, because during his extensive side quests throughout the game, we learn a lot more about him. First of all, he is in fact a very violent man, and sets up recycler charger booby traps all over the station in order to try and kill us and stop us from finding him. However, even more interestingly, we also get a lot of peculiar dialogue and speeches from him, like this one.
If we're still here when it arrives, it screams so loud. We hear it in our head. It is still far away, but it is coming closer. It will eat your prison, every person on board, and it will still be hungry.
This scene strongly implies that Will, or really Luka, is somehow communicating with Typhon, and seems to have some sort of connection with them and a sense of a looming threat, which for anyone who has played the final act of Prey knows is coming very shortly in the form of the Apex Typhon. Another super unknown example of this is if you actually first meet Luca in the cafeteria already having the water valve regulator, he will remark about how Morgan's mind seems to quote-unquote transcend the future, already knowing that he would need the item for a fix. So it seems clear then that Luca, through all of his torture and neuromod testing, has had his mind connect with the Typhon themselves, hearing their call through the coral, which gives him a greater sense of the impending doom. And after all, this would make a lot of sense, considering in-game, if we take enough Typhon-based neuromods on our playthrough as upgrades, we will start to hear the Typhon on the station speak to us and warn us about impending doom too. By far the most haunting of these Luca revelations though only comes if we allow Luca to survive until the very ending sequences of the game, where if he is alive, he will call us and provide us with this haunting monologue that most players never see.
You feel it, MU? Screaming is louder now. Getting close. I think screams are coming from the future. MU. Screams of people on Earth. Screams an animal makes when caught in a hunter's jaw.
So this proves that Luca does in fact see the future. But if that's the case, could it imply that the Typhon themselves have a special relation to space and time that we don't fully understand yet? And only by completely changing your mind and becoming one with the Typhon yourself can a human understand this. Maybe that's exactly why Alex Yu was doing all the research in the first place. Maybe that's why a human-phantom hybrid is so important for the future of humanity. But that's a theory I'll save for later on this list, because the more interesting theories for now still revolve around our man, Luca. First of all, is Luca really the bad man we've been led to believe? After all, with all this neuromod testing and personality drift, it's hard to say whether or not Luca was actually bad, or if it was just what the scientists on Talos 1 said, in order to clear their conscience that they had created a human born of pure evil. Maybe those original stories are actually just the scientists coping with the fact that they've made a monster. Next up, is Luca actually another example of the meta-narrative in Prey? For those of you who don't know, if you do the escape shuttle ending, the version of the looking glass simulation that comes up in the cutscene is actually a much lower version than the true ending, implying that the simulation we are going through is just one of many tests that Alex is putting Typhon through with Morgan neuromods, as we learn at the end of the base game. Maybe this Luca we meet in-game is nothing more than a fabrication put into the simulation by Alex that is meant to test us and our new humanity as an alien. But potentially the more interesting theory is that Luca is actually a manifestation of our Typhon mind in the simulation itself. What if the things we hear Luca say aren't actually him at all, but instead our real mind in the real world, considering we are an alien in a simulation of a human mind? When we hear Luca talk about this future Armageddon and the evil deeds he has done, maybe it's actually our Typhon mind trying to break through the simulation and alert us to something strange going on. This could even imply that the reason the cook runs away and tries to stop us is that he's afraid of us because he sees us as an alien. And a quest that's about chasing a man down who tried to kill you is actually truly a quest about a man running for his life from a bloodthirsty monster that eventually chases him down to an escape pod and murders him. And even more crazy, this idea that Luca may in fact not be such a bad man, and that it's all in our head for whatever reason, may actually be answered in one of the cut transcribes from the game, which some in the community were able to data mine in the hidden game files, and would have been the final transcribe you find on Luca's dead body in the escape pod. This is for MU, so you don't forget. TranStar asks for volunteers for experiments in space. Promises to let us go from prison if we come to this one. A life sentence, over in a day. Like all TranStar deals, it's false. They take us up in shuttle, like cattle. Take us to your prison, feed us, run tests. But something is wrong, I think. They put us back on shuttle, say the tests are over, we are free. They drug us, herd us like cattle. And then they bring us back here. You bring us back here, and kill us one by one. Feed us to your beasts while you watch and take notes. I see it. There, MU, on your uniform. You watch as you open my cage. Let me see the beasts you keep here. It is not evil, I think. It is an animal. It is hungry. But the hunger, it is everywhere. It is hungry for thought. It enters my brain, leaves hunger there, like an egg. It grows, cracks. Its hunger inside of me. It's almost all I can think about. But it does not eat me. Maybe it does not like how I think, or sees my brain is wrong, or maybe you decide to stop when I scream. I go back to my cell, and doctors come with needles and tests and questions. I bite their fingers, swallow them whole, and they beat me, take me to security. Alarms, guards try and move me and I kill them, but their uniforms do not fit. I am still hungry. Go find crew to blend in. Find the kitchen. Find an idiot man who lets me in, and I look at him. His suit size fits me. I kill him, and now I am him. I do this again and again. Help people come to the kitchen, see what they have, kill them. They are just TranStar. It's just yet another amazing example of how well constructed the narrative and meta-narrative of Prey is, and just how many connections you can start to make when looking deeper into this story. I can't stress enough how underrated everything about this game is, and how much more love it truly deserves. Now that I have made over 10 hours worth of content on video game theories and lore, I know that some of the best and least well-known things seem to always come from little one-off books or texts that no one actually reads in the game. And Prey is no different, because the 3-part evacuation series of books tells a panic-inducing story about secret advanced testing taking place on Earth. Day 1. Some jets flew over, very low, and the sound was so loud it made me jump. I don't know where they were from, but they were bristling with bombs and rockets. Everyone was looking up and the sounds of the jets was echoing off the buildings, but we could not see them anymore. The sky was clear and I could see some pink smoke rising from the direction of the stadium. Then the sirens started. I had not heard them since my childhood. Some people stood confused, but my instinct told me to run. Run away from the stadium. Run away from Alzia. Some people were running with me, but they didn't know where to go. I saw a policeman directing people into a basement restaurant. I think it was an old bomb shelter. I looked up at the sky again and saw an airliner. It was not military, I am certain. I think it was going to the airport. While I watched, it turned into glitter and without a sound, it was gone. A man near me began to curse. I fell down and hit my head on the street. Day 2. I woke up, still in the street. An M35 truck was stopped near me and the driver was yelling at me to get in. There were several people in the back already. 4 or 5 soldiers and about a dozen civilians, including children. I got in the truck and someone gave me a bottle of water. I asked what was happening and the soldier just shrugged. The pink smoke was now mixed with gray and swirled into the sky. There was so much of it, it seemed to cover the entire city. We kept picking people up and the truck was full. Before we got to the highway, we heard shooting. The soldiers climbed down and readied their weapons. The commander told me to drive the truck as far as possible to the west. Then they ran towards the shooting. Day 3. We had driven far enough that our fuel ran out. More jets flew over, headed towards the city. One circled back and made several passes over us but did not shoot. That night in the desert, we sat by the empty truck and listened to the booming of artillery. Flashes of bombs and lightning covered the horizon. In the morning, our city was lost in what appeared to be a shimmering heat wave. High overhead, there were brilliant flashes of lights. Some said it was an atomic bomb, and others said it was God's wrath. Today, I know it was just an accident. Scientists that thought they knew everything, but they did not. This strange recounting of events is something not touched on at all during the main quests in Prey, and it seems to tell the story of government testing that went extremely wrong. Most theories online speculate that this evacuation was actually the result of some early failed recycler technology accidentally being set off. This line in particular stands out. I looked up at the sky again and saw an airliner. It was not military, I am certain. I think it was going to the airport. While I watched, it turned into glitter without a sound. It was just gone. That glitter that this person saw was likely actually the output from a recycler charge going off. As we know in game, throwing a recycler grenade at anything causes it to explode into different colored balls of material, something that could easily be mistaken for glitter. But then there comes the question of what is all of these giant white flashes and pink smoke extending into the sky? To me, that pink smoke almost sounds like the residue of a Typhon-based ability going off, and those white flashes could in fact be either recycler charges or nuclear bombs going off. To me, what is most interesting about all of it though, is that it implies there was some alien testing going on Earth as well, not just aboard Talos 1, which would make sense considering in-game, multiple high-power governments had their hands on this technology for decades before. Could it be that the United States government almost unleashed the Typhon onto humanity much earlier than TranStar? Maybe all of those flashes, smoke, and weird glitter was the result of the United States actually setting off massive recycler grenade explosions all over in order to stop a Typhon threat that had just escaped, or just an accidental mishap entirely. Either way, the reach of the research going on at Talos 1 extends far beyond the walls of just the space station itself. As we already discussed earlier on this list, the mimics and how they function was one of the biggest points of research on all of Talos 1, with the main theory being that they create portals to different dimensions and swap places with objects that they disguise themselves as in our real world. But one very rare transcript in game might just reveal some very peculiar versions of these other dimensions. Titled A Universe of Shoes, it's a short entry from two women on the Pythias moon base we can find in Mooncrash. What's the emergency? This mimic you brought me. Something is definitely wrong with it. It keeps throwing various shoes at me? Are they nice shoes? I'm serious. It's like punching holes to somewhere. A universe of shoes, I don't know. But my point is, someone with sufficient Typhon abilities and a strong attachment to someplace else, like a place like Earth? Yes, exactly. I think you could open a door, maybe even walk through it. It would be more like getting sucked through a very tiny straw. I think I could tweak the containment shield to stabilize the mimic. We'd need Riley's permission to run this. Well, what are you waiting for? I'll be in the lab. The idea of a mimic creating quantum tunneling through the universe into an entire realm of nothing but sentient shoes is obviously hilarious, but it also makes us wonder what other kinds of universes are out there in the Prey lore. Because in this entry, it's implied that mimics can transform into things they haven't yet seen before, in theory, from other dimensions. And if this is true, could this power potentially be harnessed in order to travel to new and interesting space-time dimensions themselves? For me at least, this gets my mind racing on a potential Prey sequel, where at some point in the game, we could gain the ability to travel to new and super varied locations and new dimensions that would provide a huge variety in environmental design and allow us to use our powers in more interesting ways. And more than anything, it's just another example of how cool and deep the lore of Prey goes when you dig more into it. Even if the lore here is probably just a joke, it has a lot of potential. The first thing that most players do when they wake up as Morgan in his room in the beginning of Prey is run over to their computer and log in to check their emails to see what's going on. But for players paying especially close attention, you may have noticed that Morgan's password is actually FP Aradox ? For those that don't know, this is an obvious reference to the Fermi paradox, which is a popular question in science that asks why we have not found any intelligent life yet, even with the high likelihood that it should be occurring more often. We can even search Morgan's room more and find documents and books that directly talk about this weird conundrum, and the connections only get deeper too when we look at the posters in the room as well, which show diagrams of the Fermi paradox, as well as references to the Drake equation, which was a mathematical model meant to calculate the probabilities of aliens actually existing in the universe. It's a cool Easter egg for those of you who missed it, and was our first in-game hint that something strange was about to happen. But for me, it's the poster near the front door that has me really intrigued, as it almost looks like an indication of how the Typhon may have arrived into our realm of existence. And if that is what this painting is of, could it be that the Typhon stem from some sort of alternate dimension of pure darkness from which they traverse to find us? Considering we have almost no idea where these aliens actually stem from, this poster may be our best indication. Phantoms are one of the most common and horrifying enemy types we encounter in all of Prey, and are formed from Weaver Typhons when they find dead and rotting human corpses, which they then swiftly turn into monsters that we know and love. While the standard Phantoms frequent Talos 1 throughout the game, there's also many lesser known and more rare variants as well, like the Thermal Phantoms that raise fire from the ground, the Voltaic Phantoms which shoot electrical bolts, and the Etheric Phantoms which fire off large kinetic blasts. Potentially the most haunting thing about the Phantoms in Prey, though, has nothing to do with their extraordinary abilities in combat, but rather their haunting voices. You see, it's not uncommon when playing the game that you will hear what sounds like strange hums, screams, and screeches coming from the Phantoms hiding in rooms close by. But what a lot of players might not know is that by speccing deeper and deeper into the Typhon-based abilities in game, these horrifying screams start to become more coherent.
Are you alone? Are you angry? Morgan, what does it look like? The shape in the glass.
What was originally scary sounds becomes even more horrifying when we hear the Phantoms start to make remarks about Morgan himself and what is going on in the station, which makes perfect sense considering taking too many Typhon-based neuromods in-game starts to change Morgan into a Typhon himself, which is, by the way, also why security turrets and operators on the station begin to attack you if you level up too many times into Typhon-based skill. This starts to make us ask the question though then, are these phantoms sentient? Why are they trying to communicate with us in the first place? Some theories postulate that these phantoms are merely repeating words and phrases they have heard from other people on the station, or even mimicking the speech patterns of the hosts they originally took over. We can see examples of this where phrases we hear from the psychologist speaking to phantom subjects can be heard being repeated by the phantoms over and over in game.
You seem frustrated.
You seem frustrated.
But then how are some phantoms saying things like, "What does it look like? The shape in the glass," which is an obvious reference to the ending of the game where we find out everything has been a looking glass simulation. So maybe then the phantoms are actually just glitching out in the simulation itself? But then how could Morgan's memories still see so many human-like behaviors from the phantoms in the first place? A perfect example of this comes from one of my recent streams, where we actually found a phantom that became scared of Morgan and tried to hide in a corner. I'm glad you guys like the wrench, by the way. Alright, that guy just teleported away. That's no fun. He's definitely hiding in the back. 100% about to just sneak up on me. There he is! Oh, he's hiding! What the hell? I almost feel bad for Yuri. He almost looks scared, though. Is that intentional? Oh, what do we got here? Either way, something weird is going on with the phantoms in the Prey universe, with my best guess being that their ability to take over hosts leaves them with some lingering side effects of the previous humans' emotions and personality. But maybe the story goes even deeper, and the phantoms themselves are actually screaming out in pain for help from something. Could the phantoms actually be prisoners in their own body, whose minds are now melded with their horrified host? If there is in fact a way to bridge the gap between humanity and the biggest threat we've ever seen, Phantom's secret power and ability to take over a host in their mind is probably it. You may have noticed during your time on Talos 1 that everyone you come across is an adult. There aren't any children, and that's because children were never allowed on the space station, which naturally makes sense considering its real purpose is for hyper-advanced and top-secret testing on alien organisms. However, that doesn't mean we don't see anything relating to kids in the games at all, like the doll from Moon Crash, or even more interestingly, this note in the base game. "Hi Mommy, I've been having bad dreams since you left. Dr. Preston said I should draw it, and that would help make them go away. I hope you like my picture and come home soon. I love you, Corey." Next to this note we can find this picture, which seems to clearly be a drawing of a phantom, like we see in game. But how could this be? After all, the note from this child would have come from Earth, not Talos 1, yet lo and behold, here it is. We know that telepaths in game have the ability to read people's minds and alter how we perceive the world, but the issue with this is we still have the physical evidence of the mother having the note. Potentially she was mind-controlled to write it herself, but we can't find any other instances of anything like this in-game to corroborate this theory. Could it then be that this child actually saw the Typhon on Earth? Maybe the Typhon had already gotten to Earth long before the escapes at Talos 1 and at the Pythias moon base. Another explanation too would be that the telepath on board Talos 1 somehow saw the connection between the mother and son and tapped into the son's mind on Earth in order to make the drawing. But in my opinion, that would make no sense because I just don't see the motive for a telepath to actually do this. What benefit does that provide the Typhon race of aliens? But that would mean that the most likely explanation here is that the child did in fact see some sort of alien monster like this, meaning Typhon would in fact already have been on Earth. Think about all of those scary stories of monsters hiding in the dark and mysterious sounds we hear about every new millennia on Earth. What if all of these ghost stories and paranormal run-ins were actually just humanity making first contact with a hostile alien force that would later be studied on Talos 1 far into the future? Honestly, this theory does seem pretty far-fetched, so the real explanation is probably it's a telepath doing something. But either way, something is weird going on here with this drawing, and if it really is a child on Earth, then this story goes much deeper than we originally thought.